Today on Death Toll Racing, we pull out a blast from the past. We steal the transmission out of it and put a TCI Manual valve body on it. We also convert it to a 4x4, so it's Turbo 350 using an advanced adapters kit. We get the transfer case back installed, the slip yoke eliminated one. We get our crossmember lower control arm mounts back installed. We modify the torque converter cover so that it fits the Gen V LS motor. All right, so here is the little truck. We restored this thing at about 98, or mostly restored it. We never got it finished. It was a friend's truck, and it was actually his daily driver in high school. So it was a V8 S10 in high school, which was pretty cool, especially back then. But anyway, it never got running. It sat around from 98 on. I bought it from him. When he had to get rid of it, he just running out of places to put it. Anyway, I bought it from him and I stuck it in the corner of my garage, and it's sat there ever since. Okay, here we go. We are going to pull this thing apart and get it ready for our application. So, which removes some things and does all that stuff. We're going to put a manual valve body in it, so it'll be a full manually controlled transmission. So you won't need TV cables or vacuum modulator or even the governor, I believe. I wouldn't imagine you need the governor anymore. So anyway, we're going to follow the directions. I'm going to go step by step with the directions and let you know how everything goes, and you'll be watching it the whole time. So it should be pretty fun to watch get done. It's a nice clean transmission. It has been modified for the use for those headers that go in the S10s, which is fine for us. In fact, it may actually help us a little bit as far as clearances and stuff on that. So we just may have to get creative with cover, because we will definitely be needing cover in that car. So anyway, let's get going on it. We'll see what we run into. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I don't want to take all the oil out of this. It's never been ran, so it has new oil in it. So I actually want, when I flip this thing over, since it's been sitting since about 98 or so, I want to flip this thing over and actually let the transmission kind of fill up with oil for now. And then once it's been soaking for a while as we're doing our work, I will then flip it back over and let that oil drain out of it, and we'll put new fresh oil in it. Not that it's not new and fresh, it's been sealed up for 20 years. So anyway, so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to plug the vent hole first, and I'm just going to use a rubber cap, like a vacuum cap that fits OD, put it in, closed in first, and that's going to be my cap. That's the vent hole. You may have a straw coming out of it. If you do, it's not going to seal up for crap. So, but not too many people are going to want to do this this way, because you're not usually doing this to a 20-year-old transmission that's been sitting around for 20 years. So I'm going to flip it over opposite way so that we don't lose anything out dipstick tube. Okay, so the directions are written as if you are doing this while the transmission is installed. Obviously, I have to tailor those directions just a little bit because we're doing it upside down. Step 1 doesn't apply because it's already out, so step 2 is removing the oil pan and the oil, and step 3 is removing the filter and saving the filter gasket. Okay, so step 4 is removing the kickdown valve wire. So you just pull the pin out, it's like a diaper pin, just pull it out, and then you can just unhook the wire from it. And here you can't see, but I'm just taking there's a little retaining bolt that retains the kickdown cable into the transmission, so I'm just taking that out. So what I did here wasn't really necessary. You should be able to pull it out. You're discarding all this stuff anyway, but I'm just removing the wire from the cable so that I can tap mine out, because my cable's stuck in pretty good, so I had to get a little creative and tap it out from the inside. Normally they come right out, but this is that billet one, so it's a little more stubborn. Okay, and now I'm kind of just going back to step 1. I'm just making sure it's in neutral, so I put it in park and then put it back into neutral. And then we're going to remove what they say is 17 bolts on the valve body. It's actually 18. I don't know why their directions say 17. I suspect that maybe they're not counting the bolt that I just took out right there for the cam follower that on the shift selector. But anyway, just take the bolts out and we'll move on to step 6. Well, I guess we're still in step 5. Step 5 is still going on. We got to take the valve body off, and they're telling you to make sure you're looking at the position of the shift selector valve That's what's going hooked up to the shifter with that little S clip. So you just gotta lift it up. I'm trying not to tear the gasket. It's not really necessary. You can let it tear. If you're doing this upside down, you're going to be dropping. Well, no, you won't yet. Just make sure you just don't drop it. It says specifically not to drop it. I'm sure most of you wouldn't just throw the thing on the ground. Okay, and now we're on step 6. This is where we're taking that spacer plate off. And this is where, once you unbolt that plate is loose, and this is where you'll drop 4 balls if you're doing it upside down. I'm having to remove the balls manually, which are, when it's full of fluid like that, they are kind of challenging to find. But there should be four little check balls, and they're Teflon or something like that, so they're not magnetic, so they don't come out very easily. And now I'm just going to go ahead and dump the fluid because there's drilling involved in the next step. So I'm gonna get the fluid out so that we aren't mixing metal chips and fluid. Okay, well, and it turns out I don't need to drill because I have the model of the transmission that has the 5/16 hole. And this is where I get a little concerned with their directions because I had the 5/16 hole. And if you had to drill it, they're telling you to drill it to 9/64ths, which is great, except I'm not sure if you'd be able to use the cap they give you at 9/64ths because they give you a cap for a 5/16 hole. So I got lucky. I don't know if you'll get lucky. I'm hoping maybe you would have a step down where it'd be 5/16ths and then down to a smaller hole, and that's the hole you'd be drilling, but I don't know why you would drill it if you're just going to tap it again. So a little confused by this step. This is step 7. Okay, so that was also step 8. Tapping the plug in is step 8. So I'm still really confused on how on the theory there. I mean, in the end, they need to plug the hole, but I don't know why they have you drill at 9/64ths and then give you a 5/16 plug. It doesn't make much sense to me. But anyway, so now we're on to step. What are we on? We're on step 9. Which is putting the servo back in if it fell out. That's the thing with I'm wiping it off right there, right around it. That could have fallen out if you're doing this overhead. And then so step 9 is putting that back in if it fell out. And then step 10 is putting the oil pump screen into hole C, which we didn't have an oil pump screen in ours. The guy who built this didn't use the pump screen, and that's quite possible in yours too if it's been built before. A lot of the performance builder guys, they don't put pump screens in. I'm not 100% sure on why that is. Maybe restriction in volume or something like that. And then the gold plate that I put on just a second ago, that comes in the kit as well. There is no gasket between it and the other metal plate that's already down, which is odd. And then also no gasket between that and the plate, which is we're reusing from the factory plate that I'm putting down now. Okay, and then the plate that I'm putting the bolts in there is step 11. And that there's quite a bit of direction on that, but in the end there's actually a diagram. It just shows you the order that you put those plates in. And it's pretty simple. You don't need to tighten those right now, or don't tighten them right now. I zipped them down just a little bit to get everything lined up and then loosen them back up again. And now I'm starting on step 12. This is step 13. I'll do step 12 here in just a second. I'm just lining up the gasket. We're doing ours opposite since we're upside down. And then we are going to take the shift valve, and we have to put that into the new valve body, which I'm doing right here. So you slide it right out of the old one, and then put it right back into the new one. If it's real dry, put some dip it in transmission fluid or even some oil. The valve body, the new valve body is covered in oil already. So just get that thing in there, and then you'll have to set it down and slip that S hook into the shift rod before you can line it up. You just kind of got to hook that in and set it down. It's pretty easy. It's a lot easier upside down like I'm doing it. When you're doing it overhead, it gets kind of cumbersome to do it, but it's not so bad on this one. Okay, and now that you got it hooked on there, now it's lining everything up, and don't worry, it is going to be pushing away from the transmission. That's the servo doing that, the front servo. And that now you just kind of line it up and put all your bolts in, and hope that you don't have an idiot photographer who forgets to pan his camera over like I did. But basically just stick all the bolts in finger tight before you tighten anything down. That there's so many holes that it just doesn't take much for everything to get out of alignment, and you don't want to force the bolt through the paper, the gasket on it. You want to make sure that everything goes through easily so that everything stays lined up. And here I am just torquing everything. Just torque them down. I believe it was 10 foot-pounds on those. So all 10 foot-pounds, they don't give you an actual torque sequence, but basically you just want to torque from the inside out, going out. And again, I apologize that I didn't pan my camera over. And here's me. I actually yelled at myself when I realized the camera was pointing the wrong way. And what I'm doing here is I'm taking the vacuum modulator out and putting the plug that's included in the kit, the red plug, in the hole, and then you use the factory retainer to retain the plug into the hole. And here I'm doing the magical thing of putting the filter back on. I'm just reusing our old one. But if you've actually run your transmission, it'd probably be a good time to change it. This thing, it looks just fine, so I'm just going to reuse it. Now I'm just going to spend a little bit of time. I took a phone call, so I spent the time just to remove all the parts that we don't need in our situation while I was on the phone, and then we'll get into putting the pan on. Something that just drives me absolutely crazy. I don't know how things get through design and then go into manufacturing with simple problems like what you see right here. I bounce around a little bit here. I apologize. Now I'm putting in the advanced adapters conversion so that we can put our NP208 on the back of a two-wheel drive Turbo 350. Okay, and now back to manual valve body stuff. I'm going to remove the governor. You can leave it in. It wouldn't really hurt anything in there, but I would take it out if it were mine. So just pop the cover off. Normally there'll be a clip on it. This one, for some reason, doesn't have a clip. It has super glue instead. So I pop the cover off, take the governor out, discard it, and just put the cover back on. Okay, I have this all mocked up because it says in the directions for this adapter you have to trim that shaft. And at first I thought you didn't. But now that I'm looking at it, now that I actually did the measurements, this shaft shouldn't be sticking out of this adapter more than 1/2 of an inch. And it's sticking out 1 1/4 inches. So I measured the depth of the, so the input gear, or the input of the transfer case is actually inside of this adapter. So it goes way back into here. And so I measured the overall depth of how deep we can go. And basically this thing can't be, 1/2 inch is going to be, will leave us an 1/8 inch gap, basically, or 3/16 gap. So we need to basically cut that shaft off right at 1/2 inch from there. So I'm going to mark that, and then we'll take this back off, and we'll actually cut that shaft off. Okay, so I got a clean spot right here where I'm going to use my slide scale, and it's backwards when I do it from this side. I was looking at it from this side. So anyway, I made a 1/2 inch mark on here. It's probably really hard to see for you. But all I need to do is hold this flat on there, mark my 1/2 inch. We're through the splines at a 1/2 inch by quite a bit, so we really don't need to be super accurate on this. And we really only need it on the top since that's all we can get to. We're gonna have to use an abrasive wheel on it. I believe if you tried using a portaband or a sawzall on that, it would be probably pretty rough going. Okay, so now you can probably see our mark pretty good. Now I am going to use our favorite shop pack tool, tinfoil. We don't want metal in there, or the grinding dust and metal in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a snowflake like you did in elementary school. Do that. And then we're just going to do this. And that'll shield it mostly. And now we make it a useless two-wheel drive transmission. Okay, so now we're going to clean it up and put a bevel back on it. Okay, first things first, we're going to square it off. I cut it really square, but I'm at, right here it's a little out. You really want to get critical. See how square I cut that? Pretty good. Even better there. Get much better. That looks pretty good. Now we'll take a square file. And we're actually going to file the spline there just so it doesn't have resistance for us getting it on there. And now this is a little time consuming, not too bad. So I'm just taking it like if it were flat, which you can do, and then I'm just going to kind of angle it back and just go kind of in two directions, just so I have a little bit of a bleed-in bevel. This is not 100% necessary. It just makes it easier, especially in my case where I have to lift that thing overhead, and it's not heavy enough to justify rigging it up on something to lift it up, so I just lift it overhead, so I want it to slide right on. It's annoying when you do that, and I don't. Okay, so that's good. So now I'm going to take a wire brush and get this. All right, and now I'm just going to clean that up, wipe it off, and take the foil off. Here I am drilling, and I'm just tapping, actually. I'm using the factory hole as the pilot. And I just tapped an 1/8 inch pipe, and then I put a brake fitting adapters to a 3/16 brake fitting in the hole, and that way we can actually run a brake line up higher in the car than what would normally be on that thing, which is just basically a little curved straw. And now I'm softening up all the edges of the areas that were cut on this thing, just so we don't have anything sharp. Don't worry, once we get this car all done, we'll touch up all the shiny areas of our pretty transmission where we had to grind it. We may have to modify it some more, so I don't want to go through touching anything up right now. So now I'm just going to remove. I got it up on the transmission jack, and I'm taking the engine adapter off of it so that we can get it going. I got the converter, was already filled with fluid. We were actually reusing the Turbo 400 converter from another known good transmission. I didn't just put some random converter on it. But I wanted a stock converter. This thing had a 3000 stall on it, and obviously we don't want that in this thing. So I put a stock Turbo 400 converter in. And then we jack it up, and just typical putting transmission in a car. We know it fits. We've had it in there already, so or one in there, a case in there already. So we should be good to go. So I'll just get that thing in, and I'll get it buttoned up, and we'll move on to the transfer case. If you are putting a Turbo 350, a Turbo 400, 700R4, any of those things onto an LT motor like we're doing, the same LS crank spacer is what you need. I had it on there already. I don't know if you can really see that. All right, now I just put a sealer on there. You got to make sure you seal it because the transmission the transmission's fluid is all the way up to the transfer case there, and then just bolt it on just like normal. Obviously making sure you got down, and up, and tighten it up. And we are don't forget your rubber band at the end. I call it a rubber band. It's the seal, the square cut O-ring that goes around. That adapter, that's pretty important. You don't need to put gasket maker on the 4-bolt flange. You just need that square cut. Alright, now you just get to eat your Wheaties and then lift the thing up there and slide it on. And this is where it pays off to have made that initial filing, that we did to the splines, just so it'll start on there. And now I just put on the transmission mount and rattle it on. Alright, now I'm just going to roll the cross member under that also houses our lower control arms. And I'm going to bolt it on with our excessive number of bolts. Alright, now we're going to put in the torque converter bolts. So remember, when you're putting the transmission up, there never should be pressure on the torque converter. If you're pushing on the converter isn't set all the way into the front pump, and if you force it in there, you're going to break the front pump. I've seen it done way too many times. So I'm just turning the engine with 24mm wrench up front or socket up front, and then actually if you get the bolt right up next to where the starter mounts, the engine won't rotate. If you use a deep well socket, it'll actually just pivot around there, so you can tighten it up pretty good. And now I'm just putting on the covers that came in our kit. I'll show you the part numbers here in just a second as we modify them. Now we're going to modify the torque converter cover, the flywheel cover, inspection plate, or whatever you want to call it. They don't fit with these pans, so you have to cut them. So we're going to have to hold it up and just trim away at it until we get it to fit, and then we'll modify it so that it looks good. What I'm drawing there is going to be our first cut, and then we'll have to trim from there. Alright, and for this one I used an air nibbler, and I just nibbled it off and leaving about a ½ inch going around the back side of the radius where it's interfering with the oil pan. Alright, and test fit number 2, it's closer, but I still can't get it to go. It needs to go forward still quite a bit, I can't quite get to the holes. So I see one spot that's hitting, and that's on this cover. And the tab. So I still had the factory cover on that side from the 6L90, and it has like a little bump on the back. So the new one that came in our flywheel kit that we ordered quite a while back didn't have that bump, so it's smoother. So I replaced it, and then we'll try it again. And test fit number 3, it's closer, but it still doesn't fit. It's still too thick on the engine side, so we need to trim it back even farther yet. So what I'm doing here is I figured it needed to go forward like 3/16 of an inch, which is about the thickness of my fabrication pencil thing. So I just laid it flat on the table there and then just drew a line with it using the thickness, and I'll just cut it off there and we'll go from there. I had to use a body saw here, and I'm trying to hold it flat, so I'm kind of cutting through it thick-wise. But I just want to try to nail our depth so it doesn't look all wobbly from the bottom when you look up at it, because I'm starting to worry that you'll see the cut now, because it's kind of getting down towards the bottom. And here I'm just going to smooth it out, just get all the jagged parts in from the body saw and make it so that we don't cut ourselves on it. Hey, and there we go. It fits. It actually looks pretty good too, but there's still some modifications we're going to do to it. But first, we're going to drill the transmission out the factory holes. We had those sheet metal screws in it, so we're going to tap at 1/4-20. Okay, so now it's kind of hard to see what's going on right here, but the sheet metal cover is actually sticking into where the starter's going to go. So I'm going to trim that just so it's the same shape as that plastic cover, just so we don't have interference issues there. And here I'm actually marking the plastic covers. I'm going to trim those as well so that they're not sticking out like they are little Dumbo ears, so that they just kind of line up a little better. Alright, so I'm just using sheet metal shears to cut the plastic. It works just fine. And then finishing up in the areas that are more complex for the sheet metal shears with a razor blade. And then I use the razor blade to scratch the edges, kind of like file the edges round. And then I'll also cut, I marked the sheet metal cover again where it was hanging over, where it was too wide, the flat part. So I'm going to trim that back as well, and then grind it down smooth. Okay, and now I'm going to put everything back on and bolt the cover up, so that we can do one last test fit and make sure all our cuts lined up in the right spot. And then we're going to figure out where to drill it, because we need an upper mount. We don't have anywhere to mount our sheet metal to up front, on the sides, because that part of the transmission was cut off and now the sheet metal was cut off as well. Alright, now we drilled it. We're drilling it for a 1/4-20 tap. And then you'll notice on the driver's side we went through the sheet metal and the transmission. On the passenger side we went through just the transmission. And you'll see why here in just a second. Alright, so now I'm going to oversize the hole in the sheet metal cover, because we just need that to be a pass-through hole. And now we're going to add a tab on there on the sheet metal cover for the hole we drilled. I needed to offset it because it wasn't in a good spot in the transmission, so we're just going to add a little bit of metal to our cover, and the metal, that little piece of metal is just going to be a washer that I ground the top off of. So there's a little mark I made right at center, and I knew the hole is right next to the cover, so I just tack on a washer. You'll see here in just a second, and then I'll just weld it up and grind it smooth, and we're good to go. Now we're just going to install it, and it installs just perfectly. The edges line up really well. It actually turned out pretty good. I still need to pull it down and paint it and stuff, but I'm going to end this episode right here. I will do that before you see it again next time. Thanks for watching. We should have, by the end of the week, I should have another video out, hopefully this weekend, of this thing getting all the suspension and stuff put back in it. So hopefully it'll be sitting on the ground again next time you see it. So stay tuned for that. This weekend I do plan on doing that cam swap on the Ford, so if you're thinking about that, Chevy conversion on the valve train, and a comp cam going into that thing. So thanks for watching. We'll see you later this week.